Liam had always dreamed of living in a quiet, welcoming neighborhood, a place where he could just exist without having to explain himself. After years of renting in the city, he finally bought a small, charming house in a well-maintained community. It was the kind of place with tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed lawns, and friendly-looking neighbors who waved at each other. For the first few days, everything felt perfect. The air was fresh, the nights were quiet, and the neighborhood seemed peaceful. But that peace was short-lived, because on the third night, his pride flag disappeared. Liam had hung it up that morning, just a small flag, neatly pinned to the porch railing, a quiet nod to who he was. By the time the sun set, it was gone. At first, he thought maybe the wind had taken it, but then he noticed the ripped fabric near the flower bed, torn like someone had grabbed it and shredded it apart. His stomach twisted. This wasn't an accident. Still, he brushed it off. Maybe some kid messing around, maybe just a misunderstanding. But deep down, something told him it wasn't. So, the next morning, he put up another flag. A little bigger this time, a little bolder. That night, it disappeared again. But this time, something new appeared, a folded letter, taped to his door. The letter was printed on thick, official-looking paper, with the logo of the Homeowners Association, HOA, at the top. Dear resident, it has come to our attention that an unauthorized decorative display has been placed on your property. As per HOA guidelines, all exterior decorations must align with community standards to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. Please remove any non-traditional signage immediately to avoid further action. Sincerely, Homeowners Association. Liam read it twice, then a third time. Non-traditional signage? He muttered under his breath. Really? He had seen American flags, college football banners, even a neighbor with a full-sized wooden cutout of Santa Claus still up in February. But his flag was an issue? His fingers tightened around the paper. This wasn't about decorations. And that's when he saw her. Across the street, standing with perfect posture on her front lawn, was a woman in a navy blue blazer and pearl earrings, watching him. She had the look of someone who had never lost an argument in her life, arms crossed, lips pursed, exuding a level of control that made the air feel heavier. Liam had never met her before, but somehow, he already knew her name, Karen, and from the way she was looking at him, he knew something else too. She was just getting started. Have you ever dealt with a Karen like this? What would you do in Liam's shoes? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see what happens next. Liam wasn't the kind of person to back down. The HOA letter didn't scare him. The missing flags didn't intimidate him. And Karen's disapproving stare, that was just fuel to the fire. So the next morning, he put up another flag. This time, he secured it tightly to the porch railing, double knotting the fabric around the post. If someone wanted to take it down again, they'd have to work for it. But Liam underestimated just how far Karen was willing to go. The first warning shot came the next day. Liam woke up, grabbed his coffee, and stepped outside to enjoy the crisp morning air, only to find his front yard covered in trash. Not just any trash. His own garbage, banana peels, empty food containers, ripped up mail, things he'd thrown out the night before, now scattered across his lawn like someone had dumped the entire bin onto his property. His first thought? Maybe some animal got into the trash. But then he saw his garbage can upright, lid sealed, completely untouched. Someone had dug through his trash and deliberately spread it out. Karen's house was directly across the street. And even though her blinds were mostly closed, Liam could feel her watching. He took a deep breath, grabbed a trash bag, and cleaned it up. He wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a reaction, but inside, he was fuming. Later that evening, just as Liam was settling in with a glass of wine, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find 2 police officers standing on his porch. "Sir, we received a noise complaint from a neighbor," one of them said, his expression neutral. Liam blinked. "Noise complaint? I've been home alone all night. The only thing playing in here is my TV on low volume." The second officer glanced past him into the house. "Mind if we take a look around?" Liam sighed but stepped aside. They walked through the living room, the kitchen, even peeked into his backyard before coming back to the front door. "Yeah," the first officer said, almost bored. "Looks like this was a false alarm. Sorry to bother you." Liam forced a smile. "Let me guess, Karen?" The officer hesitated. He didn't confirm it, but the slight smirk on his face told Liam everything he needed to know. As soon as they left, Liam marched straight to his laptop and pulled up the HOA handbook. If Karen wanted a war, he was going to learn exactly how to fight back. A few days passed. The trash incident didn't happen again. The noise complaints stopped. Liam thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had given up. He was wrong. One afternoon, he found another letter taped to his door, this one even more absurd than the first. "Dear Mr. Liam, it has come to our attention that your front lawn does not meet HOA landscaping standards. Section 4.2 of the Community Guidelines requires all residents to maintain uniformity in grass length and garden decor to preserve the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. Please ensure your lawn complies within 48 hours to avoid a formal citation. Sincerely, Homeowners Association." Liam stood there, reading the letter, then glanced at his lawn. It was perfectly fine. He didn't even have much of a lawn, just a small patch of well-kept grass and some potted plants on the porch. Meanwhile, the house next door had weeds taller than his knees. He didn't need to guess who was behind this complaint. Liam was done playing defense. He pulled out his phone, took dozens of pictures of his yard, his neighbor's yard, and every single actual violation in the neighborhood. Then, he wrote his own letter. "Dear HOA, I have received your notice regarding my lawn. Attached are photographs showing that my landscaping is within compliance with HOA standards. Additionally, I have documented several other properties with violations that have gone unaddressed, including homes with overgrown weeds, unapproved decor, and visible property damage. If my lawn is deemed unacceptable, I assume you will be issuing similar citations to these properties as well. Please confirm. Best." Liam. He hit send and waited. The next morning, Liam was sitting on his porch, enjoying his coffee, when he noticed Karen walking toward him. She never walked. She patrolled. But today, her posture was stiffer, her expression tighter. She stopped at the foot of his steps, folding her arms. "You think you're clever?" she said. Liam smirked, sipping his coffee. "I think I follow the rules. You know, the real ones. Not just the ones you make up as you go." Karen's jaw clenched. "You don't belong here." Liam's smile didn't fade. "See? That's the thing. Karen, I do. For a second. Just a second." He saw something flicker across her face. Something deeper than anger. Hurt? Regret? No. Impossible. She turned sharply and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. The war wasn't over, but Liam had just won the first battle. Liam knew Karen wouldn't take his little act of defiance lightly. The way she had stared him down after their last encounter told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't over. And sure enough, she struck back harder. 2 days later, a new letter arrived. But this one wasn't just another fake violation. It was an invitation to the next HOA board meeting. "Dear Mr. Liam, please be advised that your presence is strongly encouraged at the upcoming HOA meeting, where we will be discussing neighborhood compliance, community values, and expectations for new residents. Date, X. Time, X. Location, HOA Community Center. We look forward to your cooperation in maintaining the integrity of our neighborhood. Sincerely, HOA President." Karen. Liam rolled his eyes. This wasn't an invitation. It was a setup. Karen wasn't just trying to get him to follow her rules anymore. She wanted him gone. The community center was packed. More people than Liam expected showed up, murmuring among themselves. Some glanced at him as he walked in. Others avoided his gaze completely. At the front of the room, Karen stood tall, looking smug, composed, powerful. She tapped a neatly stacked pile of papers in front of her, like she had already won. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice smooth, controlled. "We have a few matters to discuss tonight. But first, there's a serious concern that needs to be addressed." Liam already knew where this was going. She turned to him, her fake smile plastered across her face. "Liam, as a newer member of this community, I'm sure you understand the importance of following our long-standing guidelines." He leaned back in his chair. "If you mean the rules you suddenly started enforcing just for me, then yeah, I understand perfectly." A few people gasped quietly. Others avoided eye contact. Karen's smile didn't falter. "This isn't personal," she said sweetly. "It's about preserving our neighborhood's character." Liam raised an eyebrow. "And what character would that be?" "Karen." Her expression hardened. "One that represents traditional family values." The room went dead silent. Liam's fingers curled around the edge of the table. There it was. She finally said it. Karen didn't care about the flag, or the trash, or the grass. She just didn't want someone like him here. "Look," Liam said, keeping his voice calm, "if you want me out of this neighborhood, why don't you just say it outright?" Karen let out a small laugh. "Liam, no one is saying that." He glanced around the room. No one was saying anything. Not the guy he had exchanged friendly waves with. Not the woman who complimented his garden last week. Not a single person who knew what was happening. And that's what stung the most. Karen didn't need to kick him out. She was making sure he felt unwelcome enough to leave on his own. His jaw tightened. "You can keep throwing fake violations at me, but I'm not going anywhere." Karen's smile disappeared. "Then you should be prepared for consequences." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Liam let out a humorless laugh. "Is that a threat?" She just tilted her head. "No, of course not," she said. "It's just things have a way of working themselves out." And for the first time, Liam felt uneasy. This wasn't just HOA politics anymore. This was personal. And whatever Karen was planning next, it wasn't going to be pretty. Liam left the HOA meeting with his heart pounding. Karen had made it clear she wasn't just trying to force him to follow the rules. She wanted him gone. And worse, no one else in the room had spoken up for him. He wasn't just fighting Karen. He was fighting the silence of everyone around her. And that silence, it was louder than her words. The next morning, Liam woke up feeling exhausted. He barely slept, his mind racing with what Karen meant when she said, "You should be prepared for consequences." Was she bluffing? Or was something worse coming? As he scrolled mindlessly through his phone, trying to distract himself, something caught his eye. It was an old local news article someone had shared on Facebook. The headline made him pause. "Tragedy strikes, local teen found dead after family conflict." Something about it felt off. He clicked the article and started reading. The story was about a boy, 17 years old, who had died by suicide nearly 2 decades ago. His parents had been well known in the community, but the article didn't mention them by name. Liam scrolled down. Then he saw the picture. His breath caught in his throat, because there, in an old, grainy photograph from 20 years ago, was a younger woman, blonde hair, sharp features, standing next to a teenage boy with her arm around him. Karen. And the boy? Her son. Liam felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. He sat there, staring at the screen, rereading the article over and over again, trying to make sense of it. Karen had a son, and that son was gay. The article was vague about what had happened, but there were hints. Mentions of family tensions, of estrangement, of a young boy who felt he had nowhere to turn. Liam felt sick, because suddenly, everything made sense. Karen wasn't targeting him just because she hated him. She was targeting him because he reminded her of what she lost. Liam had no idea how to process this information. Part of him wanted to let it go, to just move on and ignore Karen like she had ignored him. But another part of him knew that was impossible. So later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, he found himself walking across the street, standing in front of Karen's house. He knocked. Seconds later, the door swung open, and there she was, expression sharp, like she had been expecting him. "I have nothing to say to you," she snapped. beginning to close the door, but Liam stuck out his foot, stopping it. "I know about your son," he said. Karen froze. Her grip on the doorknob tightened, her eyes flashing with something that looked like panic. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, her voice suddenly unsteady. Liam took a step forward. "Yes, you do. I saw the article. I saw the picture. Your son was gay, wasn't he?" Karen's jaw clenched. "You need to leave. Now." Liam ignored her. "You think if you push me out, if you make me feel as alone as he did, somehow that will fix what happened? Somehow that will erase it?" "Shut up." Her voice cracked on the words. For the first time, Karen wasn't in control. Liam watched as she inhaled sharply, her hands trembling at her sides. She looked terrified. He lowered his voice. "You can pretend this is about HOA rules all you want, but we both know that's not true. You see me, and all you see is him, don't you?" Karen's breathing became uneven. She looked like she wanted to scream. Or cry, or both. "Leave," she whispered. But this time, it wasn't a command. It was a plea. And for the first time since moving in, Liam didn't feel angry at her. He just felt sorry. Karen never spoke about her son. The neighbors knew, but no one ever brought it up. The pain was too deep, the memories too heavy, and the guilt. It was the kind that swallowed people whole. Liam didn't push her anymore that night. He just nodded and stepped back, letting her slam the door shut. But something had shifted. For the first time, Karen looked less like a villain and more like a person who had been punishing herself for 2 decades. And Liam? He wasn't sure if he could forgive her, but at least now, he understood her. Liam didn't sleep that night. He kept replaying the moment in his head, Karen's face, her trembling hands, the way her voice cracked when she told him to leave. It wasn't anger that he saw in her eyes. It wasn't even hate. It was grief. For the first time since moving in, Liam felt something he never thought he'd feel for Karen, pity. But pity didn't change what she had done, and it didn't excuse it. The next morning, Liam stepped outside, half expecting to see another HOA letter taped to his door or his trash scattered across the lawn again. But instead, he found nothing. No letters. No Karen lurking across the street. No staged complaints. It was eerily quiet. He looked over at Karen's house. Her blinds were shut. No sign of movement inside. For someone who had spent weeks making his life miserable, she had suddenly disappeared. And that silence, it was more unnerving than anything else. 3 days passed. Karen didn't leave her house. No morning walks. No HOA meetings. Not even her usual routine of patrolling the street for rule breakers. Liam wasn't the only one who noticed. At the local coffee shop, he overheard 2 neighbors whispering. "Have you seen Karen lately?" "No. It's weird, right? She hasn't even sent out a new compliance email this week. Do you think she's sick?" "I don't know, but something's definitely wrong." Liam's stomach twisted. For weeks, he had wanted Karen to just leave him alone. But now, something about this felt wrong. So later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, Liam found himself standing on Karen's porch. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Just as he was about to leave, he heard a soft shuffling inside. A second later, the door creaked open. Karen stood there, looking hollow. Her usual pristine hair was unkempt, her face pale, her eyes tired, like she hadn't slept in days. "Go away," she mumbled, barely even looking at him. Liam didn't move. "Are you okay?" She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "That's rich. You harassed me in my own home, and now you're checking on me?" Liam sighed. "I didn't harass you, Karen. I confronted you. There's a difference." Her fingers tightened around the doorframe. He hesitated before speaking again. "Look, I'm not here to argue. He exhaled. "I read about your son." Karen's entire body went rigid. For a second, he thought she might slam the door in his face. But instead, she stepped back and gestured for him to come inside. Karen's house was immaculate. Everything was arranged perfectly, not a single cushion out of place, not a single picture frame tilted. It felt lifeless. As she led him into the living room, Liam's eyes landed on something he hadn't expected. A photo, framed, polished, and placed right at the center of the mantel. It was the same boy from the newspaper article. Her son. Liam swallowed hard. He was 17. Karen said suddenly, her voice flat. Smart. Funny. He wanted to be a writer. Liam looked at her, but she was staring at the picture. He came out to me when he was 16, she continued. I told him he was confused. I told him it was just a phase. Her voice shook. He begged me to accept him. And she let out a shuddering breath. I told him that if he chose that life, he wouldn't be welcome in this house. Liam felt his throat tighten. And he left, Karen whispered. Packed his bags that night and never came back. Silence filled the room. Liam finally found his voice. And then? Karen closed her eyes. A year later, I got a phone call. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Liam already knew how this story ended. Karen turned to him, and for the first time, she looked completely broken. I destroyed the only person who ever truly loved me, she whispered. I failed my own son, and now I walk around this neighborhood pretending I'm in control, pretending that if I just enforce the rules enough, if I just keep everything in order, then maybe, her voice cracked, maybe I can rewrite the past. Liam stared at her, speechless. For so long, he had seen Karen as nothing more than a bully, a woman who hated him just for existing. But now, he saw something much worse. He saw a woman who had built a prison out of her own guilt. Liam couldn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But as he looked at Karen, the woman who had made his life hell for weeks, but who was also just a grieving mother drowning in regret, he realized something. He didn't hate her anymore. He didn't pity her, either. He just saw her. And for Karen, maybe that was enough. Liam left Karen's house that night feeling heavier than when he walked in. For weeks, she had been the villain in his story, the bitter woman who went out of her way to make his life miserable. But now, she was just a grieving mother, drowning in a past she couldn't change. That didn't erase what she had done to him. It didn't make her actions okay, but it did make them human. And that made all the difference. The next morning, Liam found something strange on his porch. A potted plant, small, simple, delicate, no note, no explanation. Just there. At first, he was confused. Then, he looked across the street. Karen's blinds were still mostly shut, but for a brief moment, he saw them shift. She was watching. Liam exhaled. This wasn't an apology, but maybe it was the closest she could get. Word about Liam's confrontation with Karen spread fast. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now smiled at him in passing. A woman from 2 doors down even stopped by with a plate of cookies. For what it's worth, she said softly. I always thought what she did was wrong. Liam nodded. Then why didn't you say anything? She hesitated. Because Karen's always been in charge. And when someone like her decides something, people follow, or they stay quiet. Liam frowned. He wasn't sure which was worse, the person who started the fire or the ones who watched it burn and said nothing. But at least now, the silence was breaking. A week passed, then 2. Liam noticed Karen coming outside more. Not to patrol, not to check mail and rush back inside, just to exist. She still never spoke to him directly. But one evening, as he was watering his plants, she walked past his house and, for the first time ever, gave him a small nod. It wasn't much, but after everything, it was something. 2 months later, Liam received another HOA meeting notice. But this time, it wasn't a setup. It was just a normal meeting. He debated whether to go. But in the end, he showed up. Karen was there, sitting at the front. But something about her was different. For the first time, she wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She didn't push any new rules. She didn't call him out. She just sat back and listened. And maybe that was the biggest change of all. Karen never formally apologized. She never came to Liam's door and said, "I'm sorry." But little things changed. She no longer glared at his flag. She stopped nitpicking at his home. She let him exist. And in return, Liam let her be human. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was something close. And sometimes, that was enough. Have you ever encountered a Karen in your life? How did you handle it? If you resonated with Liam's story, like, share, and subscribe for more. Let's talk about the real-life struggles we all face.